Hi, this is Kendall Boyson, professional life and recovery coach, and you're listening to Encouragementology, the practice of instilling hope. Hi there. Thanks for joining me. On this show, we're exploring what it really means to let go of control, why it feels so uncomfortable, and how the need to stay in control might actually be the very thing keeping us stuck. Have you ever stepped into something, not because you were asked, but because you just knew you could handle it better? Maybe you finished someone's thought before they could get there, took over a project halfway through because it wasn't moving fast enough, or gave advice that wasn't asked for, but because in your mind, it was helpful. And if you're honest, it probably was helpful. Things got done. Problems were solved. You felt productive, maybe even needed. But there's another layer that starts to show up if you pay attention. It's that feeling when you try not to step in and you can't quite sit still. That internal dialogue starts running. This is going to go sideways. They're missing something. I should just jump in real quick. And it doesn't feel like control. It feels like responsibility. Like if you don't do it, something will fall apart. That's where this shifts. Because now it's not just about being capable. It's about being necessary. And if you spent a lot of your life being the one who fixes things, keeps things moving, fills the gaps, letting go doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels risky. It feels like something important might slip if you're not holding on to it. I've been sitting with this myself. As I've been trying to simplify things, create more space, let other people take ownership, I realized something I didn't expect. Letting go isn't just about doing less. It's about feeling differently. Because underneath the need to control, there's something else. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's identity. Sometimes it's the need to feel valued and validated. And if we don't understand that part, letting go becomes a constant internal tug of war. So today, I want to slow this down and look at it from a few different angles. Not to rush to a solution, but to understand what's really going on underneath. Let's start by redefining control, because I think most of us misunderstand how it actually shows up. We tend to picture control as something obvious, someone who is rigid, demanding, maybe even overpowering. But for most of us, it doesn't look like that at all. It sounds like, I'm just helping. I just want things to go well. I'm just staying on top of it. Control, especially in high-functioning people, often looks like competence. It's the ability to anticipate, to see what's coming, to solve problems quickly. It's being reliable. It's being the person others count on. And those are all good things. Those are strengths. But here's where it gets tricky. When those strengths aren't balanced, they start to take over space that may not actually belong to us. You start answering questions that weren't directed at you. You step into conversations before someone else has a chance to respond. You fix things that might have been someone else's opportunity to figure it out. And again, it feels helpful. But underneath that helpfulness, there's often something deeper happening. For many of us, especially if we've experienced any level of codependency or people-pleasing, control becomes a form of emotional regulation. If I stay involved, I feel more certain. If I'm needed, I feel more secure. If I can influence the outcome, I don't have to sit in discomfort. So control isn't really about the task. It's about how we feel. And when you start to see it that way, it changes things. Because now letting go isn't just about stepping back physically. It's about tolerating a feeling you're not used to sitting with. Uncertainty, discomfort, not being needed in the same way. And that's where most of us get stuck. Because it's easier to step in than it is to sit still. There's a concept in psychology called locus of control, which is essentially about where we believe control lives. Do I believe I influence outcomes? Or do I believe things happen outside of me? Most people who are driven and capable tend to have a strong internal locus of control. We believe our actions matter, that if we show up, think ahead, stay engaged, we can shape what happens. And that's powerful. But there's a tipping point. Because when that belief goes unchecked, it slowly shifts into something heavier. It becomes this quiet sense of responsibility that says, if something goes wrong, I should have caught it. If something isn't working, I should fix it. If something feels uncertain, I should step in. And now you're not just influencing outcomes, you're carrying them. And that shows up in subtle ways. You're in conversations, but already thinking ahead to what needs to be said next. You're in relationships, but managing both your emotions and theirs. You're at work solving problems before they're even fully visible to others. And again, from outside, it looks like leadership. But internally, it can feel like you're always on. Like there's no real off switch. Like when you're not actively doing something, you're still holding it mentally. That's where I had to pause and really look at my own patterns. Because I realized I wasn't just being helpful. I was staying in control because it made me feel stable. And that's a different conversation. Because now it's not about the task anymore. It's about what happens inside of you when you're not in control. Author Melody Beattie said, "We cannot control others. We can only control ourselves." And I've heard that before. It's not new. But applying it is a completely different experience. Because if you really live that out, you would pause more. You would let people finish their thoughts. You would let situations unfold without stepping in to shape them. And that can feel incredibly uncomfortable. Not because you don't trust other people necessarily, but because you don't trust the feeling of not being in control. And that's the piece that often goes unspoken. There's also research in leadership that shows something interesting. Teams that are given real autonomy, not monitored autonomy, not corrected mid-process, but actual space, tend to become more capable over time. Not immediately, because sometimes it's messy at first. Sometimes it's slower and it's not what you would have done. But over time, they grow. They build confidence. They take ownership. They start thinking differently. And ownership changes everything. But for someone else to step forward, someone has to step back. And that's where the tension lives. Because stepping back can feel like you're dropping something, like you're not doing your job, or like you're letting something slip. But what if stepping back is actually part of the job? What if creating space is just as important as filling it? And here's the question that's worth sitting with. If you weren't the one holding everything together, what would actually happen? And not the first answer, because the first answer is usually dramatic. Sit with it a little longer. Is that true? Or is that a story you've gotten used to telling yourself? Because sometimes the thing we think that is preventing failure is actually preventing growth. Let's bring this closer to home. Think of one situation where you're constantly stepping in. Just one. A person, a role, something at work or at home. Now walk yourself into that moment. Can you feel it? The point where something is happening and you're about to step in. Pause right there. What are you feeling? Is it a sense of urgency, tension? That sense that something needs to be handled? Now listen to the story underneath it. This isn't going to go well. They're missing something. I need to step in. Now go one layer deeper. If you didn't step in, what would that mean about you? Would it mean you dropped the ball? That you weren't paying attention? That you're not needed? That you're not as valuable? Because this is where it shifts. This is where control stops being about the situation and starts being about identity. Now flip it. Same situation, same moment, but this time you don't step in. You stay present. You let it unfold. And yes, it might feel uncomfortable. You might want to jump in. You might be mentally rewriting what's happening right before your eyes. But you don't move. Now ask yourself, what could go right? Maybe they figure it out. Maybe they do it differently, but it still works. Maybe they gain confidence because you didn't take it from them. And maybe you realize that things can still move forward without you controlling every part of it. That realization is where the shift begins. Let's make this practical, because awareness without action can feel frustrating. You can see it, you can name it, but if you don't have a way to shift it, you fall right back into the same patterns. So instead of trying to change everything at once, let's focus on small, intentional shifts. The first is to pause before you step in. That sounds simple, but it's more powerful than it seems. Most of the time, stepping in is automatic. It's fast and it feels instinctual. So the goal isn't to stop yourself completely. It's to slow the moment down just enough to notice it. When you feel that urge, that pull to jump in, just ask yourself one question. Was I invited into this, or did I insert myself? That one question creates space, and in that space, you get to choose instead of react. The second shift is to replace fixing with asking. If you're used to being the one with answers, this can feel unnatural at first. You might even feel like you're being less helpful. But instead of saying, here's what you should do, try asking, what are you thinking about doing here? Or how would you approach this? What that does is keep ownership with them. It allows them to think, to process, to step forward. And you're still involved, but in a way that supports growth instead of taking over. The third shift is to define your lane more clearly. And this one can be uncomfortable because it requires honesty. Not everything that concerns you belongs to you. Just because you can see a better way doesn't mean it's your role to implement it. Just because you have the capacity doesn't mean you have the responsibility. So start asking yourself, is this mine to carry? And if the answer is no, the next step is even harder. You have to let it sit. You have to let it be someone else's responsibility, even if you would do it differently. And that's where the real work is. The fourth shift is to practice intentional letting go, but in a controlled way. You don't have to let go of everything. In fact, that usually backfires. Instead, choose one situation this week where you would normally step in and decide ahead of time that you won't. Maybe it's a conversation where you usually jump in first. Maybe it's a task you typically take over, or offering advice when no one asked for it. Pick one. And when that moment comes, hold yourself back. Not forever, but just long enough to see what happens. And this is important. Don't just watch the situation, watch yourself. Notice the discomfort. Notice your thoughts. Notice if you have the urge to step in and fix it. Because the internal reaction is where the insight is. And over time, something starts to shift. You realize not everything falls apart. You realize people are actually more capable than you give them credit for. You don't have to carry everything for things to still move forward. And maybe the most important, you start to feel a little lighter. Because control can feel productive, but it also feels very heavy. And when you begin to release even a small part of it, you create space for others and space for yourself. And that's where real change begins. The A side is the story we all know. If I don't do it, it won't get done right. I'm just being helpful. This is what I bring to the table. People rely on me. I'm good in these situations. And for a long time, that story works. It reinforces your identity. It gives you a role. It gives you a sense of purpose. You become the one people turn to, the one who can step in and figure anything out and keep things moving. And there's something really rewarding about that. You feel capable, trusted, and needed. But the B side? The B side asks a different question. Not what you're good at, but what are you holding on to? Because sometimes the thing we call a strength is actually something we've learned to rely on a little too much. What if control isn't just your strength? What if it's your safety net? What if stepping in isn't always about helping, but about avoiding the discomfort of stepping back? That's a harder question, because now it's not about what you do, it's about why you do it. And when you start looking at it that way, you start to notice that maybe you're not just solving problems. You're preventing people from having them. You're not just supporting, you're preempting. You're not just leading, you're limiting. But that's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from a place of care. But impact and intention aren't always the same. This is where the B side can feel uncomfortable, but also really freeing. Because if control has been your safety net, then letting go doesn't mean you're losing strength. It means expanding it. It means learning how to trust instead of manage. how to allow instead of direct. And doing that doesn't mean you disappear. It doesn't mean you stop contributing. It means you contribute differently. You start asking instead of answering, or listening instead of stepping in. You start creating space instead of always filling it. And here's the part that's easy to miss. When you step back in, it's not just about what others gain. It's about what you gain too. You gain mental space, emotional freedom, and the ability not to carry everything all the time. If you've been the one holding things together for a long time, you might not even realize how heavy that's become. It just feels normal until you set something down. And then you notice the difference. So the B-side isn't asking you to stop being who you are. It's asking you to evolve, to take the strength you already have and use it in a way that creates more space, not less. More growth, less dependence. More trust, not more control. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not step in. There's a story about a gardener I would like to share. One who was known for having one of the most beautiful gardens in the area. People would come from all over just to see it. Rows of vibrant flowers, perfectly shaped bushes, everything standing tall and orderly. It looked flawless. And the gardener took a lot of pride in that. Every morning he would walk through the garden with his tools in hand, and he didn't just observe, he adjusted. If a plant leaned slightly, he tied it upright. If something grew in a direction he didn't expect, he trimmed it back. If a stem bent under its own weight, he supported it. Nothing was left alone for long. And at first, it worked. The garden looked pristine, controlled, predictable, exactly how he wanted it. But over time, something began to change. The plants stopped adapting. They became softer and weaker, more dependent on the ties and supports he put in place. Even a small breeze would cause them to lean because they had never learned to withstand it. And the gardener didn't understand. He was doing everything right. He was attentive, consistent, involved. He was helping. But one day something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion or curiosity. Or maybe it was just a quiet realization that despite all his effort, something felt off. So instead of adjusting every plant, he walked through the garden and he paused. He noticed a few leaning stems, but he didn't fix them. He saw uneven growth and he let it continue. And that was uncomfortable because now he was watching things happen without intervening. Days passed and some plants struggled at first. Some bent further before they straightened and some grew in ways he didn't even expect. But slowly, something else began to happen. The roots grew deeper. The stems strengthened. The plants started responding to the environment instead of relying on him to manage it all. They adapted to the wind. They adjusted to the sun, and they found their own balance. And over time, the garden changed. It wasn't perfectly uniform or controlled, but it was stronger, more alive, and more resilient. And the gardener began to understand something he hadn't seen before. His constant involvement hadn't created strength. It created dependence. And his stepping back hadn't created failure, but instead created growth. And I think there's something in that for us. Because when we're constantly stepping in, adjusting, fixing, managing, it can feel like we're helping. And sometimes we are. But sometimes we're not giving people the chance to grow roots of their own. And letting go doesn't mean abandoning the garden. It doesn't mean you stop caring or stop showing up. It means you learn the difference between supporting growth and controlling it. Because support gives strength, but space creates it. As we move into reflection, I want to remind you, if this is a topic that's really hitting home, there's a 5-day journaling companion available that walks you deeper into this idea of control, letting go, and learning to trust what unfolds. This is just a starting point, but it's a powerful one. Let's slow down and make it personal. Where in my life do I feel the strongest need to stay in control? Is it tied to a specific person, role, or environment? What patterns keep showing up in that space? How long has this been part of how I operate? 2. What am I afraid will happen if I let go in that situation? What is the worst case story I'm telling myself? What would that situation mean about me personally? Is that fear based on evidence or assumption? 3. What part of my identity is connected to being the one who steps in? Do I associate being needed with being valued? Where did I learn that I had to take responsibility for outcomes? Who would I be if I didn't play that role in the same way? 4. Where might I be limiting someone else's growth by staying too involved? Who around me hasn't had the chance to fully step forward? What might they be capable of if I created space? How could stepping back actually strengthen the relationship? Take your time with these. You don't have to answer them all at once. Even sitting with one of these questions and being honest with yourself can start to shift how you see things. If you want to share encouragementology with a friend who needs to know they're not alone in this journey of self-discovery, you can visit encouragementology.com or anywhere you stream your content to receive this episode and all others. Check out the show notes for the 5-day journaling companion and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for additional encouragement throughout the week. So I challenge you. Choose one situation this week where you would normally step in and instead take a step back. Let someone else lead, decide, or figure it out without your intervention. Notice what comes up for you and allow the awareness to guide your growth. I know you can do it. Thank you for listening to Encouragementology with Kendall Boyson, where we find positive ways to handle some of life's challenges.
I stumbled through until the path was clear. That's when I found you and how I wound up here. All I needed was a rock that I could lean on. All you needed was some wind beneath your wings. We might be seeing things from different points of view.